Reach the end of the honeymoon stage in your pastorate when you sit down and realize you're missing the last 2 pages of your sermon, and so your spouse fetches your laptop, which is not connecting to the internet. And so that's what we're going to do. But it's okay. I think I can see what I need. I tried to send it to print again. So I will try to transition from paper to screen. Worst case scenario, this will be a test of how well I prepared, right? Oh, I need the clicker. So I ask for your grace, which I know you all are so kind to give. So now the bad news, if that's not bad enough, is that because we've reached the end of this series, of course we must have a quiz. So we're going to start with a quiz, and I'm going to ask you what these photos have in common. Can you guess? Yes. I know there's a select group in this room that does really know the answer to this. I lived here. These are all of my homes over the course of my life. Now, this one should look familiar as well to the Lighters, because they also lived in that home. Yeah, that's fun when some of us share spaces. This was the very first home at Green Tree. There are a couple that are missing. A couple of these are street view. This is not what it looked like when I lived there. This is in Montezuma, Virginia, the parsonage of that congregation. This was our home on Dreger Road in Columbia, where our children spent most of their childhood. And then this is our house now up near Mount Gretna, where we moved about 2 years ago. So home has been different for me across my life. And over this, I need a much larger podium is what needs to happen now. That's okay. Over this series, the last 2 months here, June and July, we've been wandering. We've been wandering in worship. Many of us have been wandering geographically as we've traveled. Some of us have been wandering perhaps spiritually, maybe emotionally. Some of this wandering has probably felt productive and exciting, moving from point A to point B in a way that has created surprising opportunities, new learnings, deeper understandings. Some of this wandering sometimes feels confusing or overwhelming, unclear or uncertain. We thought we were heading there, but somehow we have instead ended up here. Wandering at times has felt guided and safe, and at other times felt like we were lost or even heading in the completely wrong direction. We have wandered into places of security, places of questioning, places that are unfamiliar. We have come face to face with trolls, experienced time when the way behind us closes and urges us on, found ourselves at the edge of the sea where we are called to step forward in faith, and we hope to continue to discover gentle paths that lead us forward, guided by trust in the one we follow. Wandering is like that. It's like all of that. And while this is the last Sunday of our Wanderings sermon series, it is not the last day that we will individually and corporately experience and think about wandering. I feel quite certain. I was initially planning to focus this sermon on some of the things I have found during some of my preliminary research for my doctoral program, and I will share a bit about that. But as is often the case, I've wandered in a little bit of a different direction as I've thought about where we end this Wanderings series. I started feeling nudged to head home. That's often where our wanderings end, right? At home, whatever home means. Think for a moment about a place that you consider home. What do you think of? Perhaps you imagine a physical building where you go to sleep at night and wake up in the morning, a place where you eat meals and watch TV, play games with family members, where you do your homework or maybe even work from home, where you return after vacation, where your cat curls up in your lap or your counter is comfortably cluttered with the week's mail. Perhaps you think of a place from your past, from childhood or younger years, a place that was important in your development into who you are now. You might think of a place where you feel comfortable and secure and valued. It might not be a house. It might be more connected to certain people than any physical building or location. Maybe thinking about the idea of home brings contentment and joy and warmth. I liked the language in the prayer where the weight of the world falls off your shoulders. Maybe thinking about the idea of home brings nostalgia or mourning or sadness or grief. Or maybe thinking about the idea of home is puzzling because you haven't thought about it in a while. Or you've thought about it and you aren't sure when the last time was you experienced it. Maybe thinking about the idea of home is taken for granted. Maybe it's something you're searching for. I happen to know that more than one of you is in the midst of a transition of home. What is home for you? Some of us heard during the Faith Formation Hour from Lerla, Chastain, and Daniel Tema about their ideas of home as former refugees who have resettled in Elizabethtown. And when Rebecca Dali sent me a message and said that they would be here this morning, I suspected that she might have some interesting things to share about home. And so I've asked her, Rebecca, if you want to come forward, to answer some thoughts in response to these three prompting questions. What does home mean to you? Where is home for you? And what have been the challenges and the beauties of finding home in the United States? Oh, let's get you.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. And home, to me, is where I am accepted, loved, supported, cared for, prayed, and then recognized as human being. And home is a community of people where you can find all this. It may be personal, spiritual, family, community, and all this. Where is home to me? Home to me is both here now among you and then in Nigeria and in Panther Creek and in homes of friends where we stay, in the World Conference where we just finished, we were at home. My challenge of coming here to America, as I describe home, America was a home even before I came. Our son invited us to come and become citizen. He was persecuted in his class by a Muslim professor, so that is why he could not continue his medicine. So he came, and people accepted him as a family, a home. He wrote an article, a home where there is no, a home far away from home. So he invited us to come. We became immigrants since when we are in Nigeria. So we came, spent 5 years, and then on 21st March, we became US citizen. It's a challenge to us where we get, where can we stay? Although our son opened his wide arm and we stayed with him. We stayed in Elizabethtown, we stayed in Bethany, and then Bridgewater. And a lot of families around the United States opened their arms for us. So we were not so homeless as some other refugees. And as I heard the story of some other, we are very privileged because even when we are in Nigeria, there are a lot of people who are praying and then supporting us, and so we feel at home. But physically, I miss my children, grandchildren, and then family and church. The way of worship here, I want to dance, and even in choir, I want to jump, but here everybody will be straight. And so I will say, oh, so let me behave like American and sit like this. So I miss that. But every day, I have 2 homes. Every day, I work more than 5 hours with SEPI Nigeria. I have to approve payment. I have to listen to stories. I have to cancel and all this. So I am well connected with home. And I have home at Panther. And I'm more comfortable with American home because if in my Nigeria, I will never be licensed. And, but then, I am more comfortable as a licensed minister and then maybe be ordained. So I'm more accepted, more secured, more loved here in America than my original home, Nigeria, although I have dual home. Thank you very much for giving me this.
Thank you so much, Sister Rebecca, and congratulations on your licensing. What is home for you? This question is one of several that has arisen for me as I've been working through the beginning stages of my doctoral dissertation proposal. While this idea of home is not specifically the question I am researching, it is absolutely related. The crux of my project thus far has been related to a phenomenon I've noticed here in Lancaster County, that even across political and theological difference, people seem to be fairly united around the idea of welcoming outsiders, welcoming refugees, welcoming immigrants. And I'm interested in why. What motivates people to this activity? So the first part of my research so far entailed interviews with several leaders of congregations in Lancaster County who have been or are currently actively involved in refugee resettlement work, more than just donating money or supplies. These were congregations who have had welcoming teams or set up programs to help refugees immediately after their arrival in the United States or even after they had been here for some time. Help with housing and employment and connecting with medical care and enrolling children in schools. Teaching English learning classes, teaching new residents how to drive, all of those kinds of tasks of living. The second piece of research work that I did was scouring the Lancaster newspaper over the course of 10 years, from 2012 to 2021. And I was looking for any article that cited and used the word refugee or refugees. And I was looking for how the newspaper articles were describing Lancaster County as a refugee-receiving community, and the frames or themes that were being put forth in that media source. And what I found through both of those avenues of research were that there was one particular phrase that was used far more than any other when describing why people in this local area, at least, feel that resettling refugees and often other immigrants as well is important. And you might be able to guess, but I'll tell you. Welcoming the stranger. My ultimate interest in my work, both in this congregation and in my doctoral work, and honestly in my work at the college as an instructor, is in how people can find ways to bridge gaps of understanding and work together to create positive change, building peace. I am particularly interested in the pieces of religious identity that might contribute towards building that bridge. And so I'm now in the process of going back and looking at the data from my research again, this time with an eye toward the scriptural references that pertain to these ideas. And as I look at this welcoming the stranger phrase, there are some pretty clear scriptural texts that are likely roots, although I don't know that those scriptural roots are necessarily known by those who give this welcoming the stranger as the response. There are multiple places in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, or what Christians often refer to as the Old Testament, that refer to this idea of how Israel should treat the stranger, the foreigner, the resident alien, the immigrant, depending on the translation. But in Hebrew, the word is ger. And I'd like to focus for the moment on one of those places in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy uses, I think, 22 times, more than 20 times, this word ger. And I'd like to focus on chapter 10, verses 12 through, I think it's 20 or 22. So now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? Only to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments of the Lord and his decrees that I am commanding you today for your own well-being. Although heaven and the heaven of heavens belong to the Lord your God, the earth with all that is in it, yet the Lord set his heart in love on your ancestors alone and chose you, their descendants after them, out of all the peoples as it is today. Circumcise then the foreskin of your heart, and do not be stubborn any longer. For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who is not partial and takes no bribe, who executes justice for the orphan and the widow, and who loves the strangers, providing them food and clothing. You shall also love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And it's that 18 and 19 that focuses on this idea of the ger. You shall fear the Lord your God, him you shall serve, to him you shall hold fast, and by his name you shall swear. He is your praise. He is your God who has done for you these great and awesome things that your own eyes have seen. Your ancestors went down to Egypt, 70 persons, and now the Lord your God has made you as numerous as the stars in heaven. We are likely talking about a religious context in a multi-God historical environment. Monotheism, belief in one singular God, is a fairly new idea. So much of these scriptures serve as a reminder to the people that this God is the ultimate. This God is the one who protects, but also takes care of basic needs like food and clothing. Because much of these early texts include instruction for the people on how they are to treat one another, it is also a reminder that God works through God's people to do this ultimate work of care and protection. 3 categories of people: widows, orphans, strangers, ger, are specifically and repeated throughout Deuteronomy as the following chapters provide guidelines for living. These are categories of people who are on the edges of society, have the least access to the judicial system, the least access to avenues of human justice. And even though much of Deuteronomy talks about the special relationship between Israel and God, there are strong suggestions that outsiders, others, immigrants, ger, are to be included as well. I came across an article in the Journal of Biblical Literature written by Hebrew Bible scholar Mark Glanville titled "The Ger, Stranger, in Deuteronomy, Family for the Displaced." Glanville describes the ger as a resident in a new environment, often translated resident alien, so living in a new place that is not home. This could refer to foreigners, immigrants from another country, refugees, asylees. It could also refer to internally displaced persons, people who are forcibly sent from home to elsewhere within their same country without crossing a border, but maybe outside of their usual local area, perhaps due to natural disaster, violence, economic opportunity, etc. And of course, there are also those who choose to reside in a new place, but don't have connections there, aren't integrated yet into this new home. This idea of ger is identifying a vulnerable person, or a person who finds themselves outside of the core, the family. And they're vulnerable because they do not have family yet, and social connections yet, and familiarity yet that provide security and comfort. And Glanville goes on that in addition to the ger being a vulnerable person who has been put in or moved to a new foreign place, the ger is dependent on this new environment for survival. The very place that they do not have connections, they are dependent upon this place, these people, for safety and fulfillment of needs. Glanville writes, "The strangers have left kinship ties, settlement, and land, and now dwell in a context in which they have no blood relations. They are therefore without the security and privileges that family ties and place of birth afford. The strangers are in social limbo. On the one hand, they are free and not enslaved, yet on the other hand, they are without land and meaningful connection. The strangers may be easily oppressed as they have no family members to come to their defense." Consistently in Scripture, we see the ger, the stranger, the foreigner, the immigrant, grouped with orphans and widows, which are also obviously dependent on the core group as well. And consistently, we see in Deuteronomy various ways that God is instructing the people to include the strangers, the outsiders. Take care of them by providing food and clothing. In Deuteronomy 5, no one should work on the Sabbath, including the ger. In Deuteronomy 14, allow the stranger to eat their fill. In Deuteronomy 16, include the outsiders in the festival celebrations. In Deuteronomy 24, don't withhold payment to outsiders for their work. Pay them for their day of work. Don't deprive a stranger of justice. Preserve the extras from fields and crops for the outsider. Protecting the vulnerable, providing care to those who need extra care. But Glanville's research suggests that this is not just charity, not just service to others, not just kindness and mercy. There is more than that. It is deeper than that. What God is calling for in Deuteronomy is inclusion and integration into the family. Kinship was likely understood by the Israelites and other clans and nations as more than just bloodline, blood family. Cultures were communal, and therefore identity was formed as the collective, via the group, much more than the modern individualized sense of identity that we most often think about today. Glanville uses the language grafting into kinship, like grafting a new branch of one type of tree onto a different tree. A new person or group can be grafted into a family, a clan, a tribe, a nation, and continued growth together will occur. The ger in Deuteronomy is called to be part of, integrated into that kinship ethic, the kinship value of this biblical society and culture. God is not seen as valuing Israelites over, God is seen as not valuing Israelites over outsiders. All are to be respected and cared for and protected, integrated wholly into the community. This is more than just an obligatory do good to refugees command. This is more than just welcome. This is inclusion and integration. This is making the outsider not only feel like they are allowed to coexist, but to include them and invite them to become family. We have the opportunity as a congregation to demonstrate our response to this in many ways. Part of being a family is continuing to strengthen relationships with those who have been part of this family for a long time, those with whom we have particular affinity and connections and common interests. But perhaps the more important task of being a family, being in this family together, is strengthening those on the outskirts, those who feel like strangers, those who are on the margins. How can we include and integrate as kin those who are in our community or want to be part of our community, whether we're talking about church or work or club or social circles or friend groups or country? When those others are from another country or from another town or from another subculture or from another family. Those who have joined us recently or those who have been here for a while but still haven't found their niche. Those with whom we know we don't click as well as others. That's the hard part. That requires openness on everyone's part. Openness on the part of those who feel like they are on the outside, openness to be willing to join. But also openness on the part of those for whom this place, this group already feels like kin, to extend the table of welcome. Not just to say welcome, but to say and demonstrate repeatedly, you are included here. You are also family. This is ours to do together. This is not just kindness and mercy, although it is also that, but it is blending and treating all as kin, inviting and authenticity and adapting and apologizing and forgiving. It is truly and authentically making others feel at home, inviting all into this home. In Matthew 25, Jesus uses some similar language to what we see in Deuteronomy. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it to me." This idea of inherit the kingdom invokes an even grander vision of what home might look like. Residence in the kingdom of God. Those that choose this path, welcoming Jesus by welcoming the least of these family members, are blessed. The siblings that Jesus refers to here are probably referencing a welcome for those who bring the good news of Jesus' gospel, his disciples, those that bring the counterintuitive message of inclusion and love for those on the outside. And who better to bring that message than those on the outside of our social circles and the outskirts of our cultural norms, the stranger, the foreigner, the Ger. My point is this: I think we are called to something deeper than welcome, something deeper than care and concern and a casual understanding of loving others. We are called to include and integrate the outsider, however that is defined and whomever that includes, into our family, into our home. And we are challenged to be willing to be included and integrated ourselves into kinship with others. I think it's more than just kind words and surface level welcome. It's more than just bringing them into the way we are already doing things. It's more than just including them in the rhythm of how our lives are already beating. I think it requires changing up our beat. I think it requires joining Rebecca in a different type of dance. Rearranging the furniture, maybe even the walls in our home. That's scary. And in order to do that, to really shift our comfortable sense of home to something bigger, something different, something new, for me at least, that requires tapping into that which is beyond my human abilities, that which is only extended through the blessing of the Spirit. God's justice is greater than human justice. God's love is greater than human love. God's welcome is greater than human welcome. May it all be so.